Um, so today I'd like to start our meeting with land acknowledgement. And I'm coming to you today from the traditional and unceded territories of the Musqueam, the Squamish, the Tsleil-Waututh, Kwantlen, Katzie, Semiahmoo, Tsawwassen, and Stolo nations. And I'd like to share a quote actually from the Indigenous Seed Keepers Network as well, as we are dealing with seeds. And there, I think we'd like to acknowledge the seeds too. We understand that seeds are our precious collective inheritance, and it is our responsibility to care for the seeds as part of our responsibility to feed and nourish ourselves and future generations. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker, Bob Wildfong. Bob has been saving seeds and teaching about garden biodiversity for over 30 years. He mixes science and storytelling to reveal the secret lives of seeds, plants, and pollinators. He has been a member of the Seeds of Diversity, just Seeds of Diversity since 1988 and became the first executive director in 2002. He teaches garden and food history at the Waterloo Region Museum, and as a board member of the Pollinator Partnership Canada, helps build the movement to preserve pollinators. He's a past president of the Culinary Historians of Canada and delights in explaining how we can learn about future food sustainability by remembering past lessons. So I'll throw it over to you, Bob.
Thank you very much. And what I'll talk about today is how to keep rare seeds in your seed library. So there are lots of different kinds of seed collections or seed projects that we call seed libraries. And some of them are community efforts to collect up seeds that might be maybe left over from previous years or left over from seed swaps, and finding ways to make use of them. Others might be more like regional seed collections of varieties that have an origin in a particular place or a particular value in a particular place. And then we have large seed libraries and little seed libraries. And as far as I'm concerned, every collection of seeds is important and every collection of seeds is useful as long as it is useful to the people who use it. And so we'll talk about what I mean by that, what makes a seed collection actually useful and valuable, and how you can do that on any scale and with not a lot of money and with not a lot of effort. It's a matter of kind of understanding how seeds work. So that's mainly what I'll talk about. And the whole context of it is not so much a seed saving talk. I do lots of those, and I know you can find lots of those in other places. I'm going to focus more on how to organize a seed collection or a seed library so that you can keep some rare varieties alive in that collection and keep them going year to year, so that they're going to keep on being the same rare variety year after year and not kind of change into something else. That's often what people are aiming for when they're trying to protect or preserve rare varieties that might be family heirlooms, or they might be regional heirlooms. That's our focus today. So Seeds of Diversity is an organization. If you don't know it, it's a Seed Savers organization. It's a not-for-profit agency that has members all across Canada. We have almost 2,000 members who are gardeners, and a lot of us are seed savers. And I would say at least half or more than half of those seed savers are beginning seed savers. So what we're doing mostly is helping beginner seed savers to get better at seed saving. And the reason we do that is that we want to protect the biodiversity of our seeds. There are thousands and thousands of different kinds of seeds out there, but most of them are rare. And that's kind of a big statement, right? Like how many varieties of seeds out there are rare? Most of them. And I'll show you some examples of that as we go along. But we are saving seeds so that we can preserve the diversity of seeds that we have. And if people aren't saving seeds at home and exchanging those seeds with other people, then we will lose lots of that diversity, because that's how a lot of it is being saved right now. And we need to do more. So the way that Seeds of Diversity does this is members, gardeners who are saving seeds in their backyards and on their farms. And it's a membership organization, but membership is free. We don't charge you to be a member. We ask that you participate in our programs. And people who want to get involved in this can just get involved by signing up. The heart of our program is our seed exchange, and it's a very simple thing. Seed savers save seeds that they're interested in and learn how to do that well, and then exchange those seeds with other members. The idea is then we have this large pool of seed varieties that are very often not available from any seed company. You can't get them from any other source. And so by sharing those seeds with other gardeners, and especially with seed savers who will save more seeds and offer them back again, it makes a place where those seed varieties can continue to exist and continue to be available. And we've been doing this for 3 decades now. I invite you to check it out if you don't know about it. Last year we had almost 2,400 different kinds of seeds in our seed exchange, and it runs as you'd expect from about January until April of every year. So right now we're asking our members to tell us what they have, and in January you'll be able to see what people have to exchange with each other. Now, to give us more understanding of which of those seeds are rare and which of them aren't rare, we also make an index of all the seed catalogs in Canada, and you can find this on our website. It's a really cool way to find out where you can get seeds. If you're looking for something in particular, if it's sold by a Canadian seed company, you can find it on this list, and it'll tell you where you can buy it, and so go ahead and buy it. But what it really does for us is it tells us which varieties are really common and which aren't. If I have a particular seed that I can find in this list from 20 different companies, then I know that we don't really need to preserve it. It's available from lots of places, so it's not rare. But if I see a seed that's only available from one company, or if I see a seed in our member seed exchange that's not available from any company, you can't buy it, then that means that's one that we need to save. That's one that the only way we'll still have that variety is if people are saving it at home and offering the seeds through a seed exchange or some sort of seed swap or some kind of network. And that's where seed libraries really have this opportunity to make a real difference. And so I would encourage anyone who's running a preservation project of any scale, look at these kinds of this like index of seed companies, and look at seed exchanges, and look for varieties that are only available from one source. Those are the ones that you should be prioritizing for saving, because if you can save those seeds and offer them to someone else, then you might be doubling the number of places where someone can get those seeds, and that's a huge thing, right? Now, we know that there are lots of people who are collecting seeds, lots of people who are saving collections of seeds, but from time to time, people find that they can't do it anymore. Maybe they move, maybe they get old and they just can't maintain their collection anymore. So along the way, we've made a collection of our own, which is kind of like a backup of the seeds that are in our seed exchange that our members aren't able to look after anymore. And so we wanted to find a place where we could collect them and then redistribute them so that other people would keep on growing it. But we needed a kind of a way to preserve those seeds in the meantime. And also, when we look in a seed catalog and we find a variety that is only available from one company, we'll buy it and keep it in storage in case it disappears. In case that company doesn't offer it one year, and in case no one else offers it, we will have those seeds stored up. So our seed library is partially a seed collection, like a little seed bank. And it kind of looks like this, lots of jars with seeds in it. We have now about 5,000 samples of these seeds. And I could talk a lot more about how we do it, but I want to get on with how other people can do the same kind of a thing. So the way it works is basically when members, starting from the top here, when members are offering really rare seeds in our seed exchange, we notice that. And I said before that most of our seed varieties are rare. Well, looking in our seed exchange, looking in that list of seed, or the index of seed catalogs, by far most varieties are only available from one or two sources. And so which of them are rare? gosh, half of them are rare. So it's pretty easy to find one that needs to be saved. We will order it. We'll get it from say, one of our members who's offering it through the seed exchange, or we'll just buy it from a seed company and put it in our collection. And as we monitor this, we recruit volunteers to grow the seeds. And every year we go through our list of seeds that we have that need to be regrown, and we match them up with volunteers who can grow them. Right now, we're getting lots of seeds back from our volunteer growers, and we will redistribute those seeds through our seed exchange. We'll distribute them at Seedy Saturdays and Seedy Sundays, but we'll also keep some of those seeds in this collection. The dual purpose of it is to keep a collection of seeds so that they are somewhere, but to me, more importantly, is that they're being distributed and available, because we don't want to just lock up all our seeds in yet another collection. We want them to be out there available where people can grow them. So that's where seed swaps, seed exchanges, Seedy Saturdays and Seedy Sundays are all really important vehicles for getting more diversity out there into people's gardens. I mentioned, yeah, most of these varieties are rare. I would easily say that over half of the varieties that I look at in these lists are only available from one or two places. What happened is, during the past century, if you think of all the plant varieties that existed and that we can see in old seed catalogs from 100 years ago, 3/4 of those disappeared during the last 100 years. We're only dealing now with 1/4 of the plant diversity in our gardens that we had 100 years ago. And there are lots of reasons for that. Mainly it's that there used to be lots of seed sources, lots of people saving their own seeds, lots of little seed companies. And over the 20th century, there were fewer and fewer seed companies, fewer and fewer seed growers, and therefore fewer varieties were being maintained. What's even more concerning, I think, is that the little green sliver on this pie chart, that's what you can buy. That's what's actually in seed catalogs. The other 7/8 of what's left is just with seed savers. It's in seed collections. You wouldn't be able to buy most of what's left, and we want you to be able to get those seeds and be able to grow them. So it's up to seed savers to take care of finding them, growing them, making them available. And that's what seed libraries are all about. That's what this whole movement is really for. And just to make this sort of really concrete and visual, here are 5 varieties that are really easy to find. Okay, these are among those 1/7 of what remains, or 1/8 of what remains, that you can buy in a seed catalog. You can find these in seed catalogs, but for every 5 varieties that you can find in a seed catalog, there are all of these that you can get, but not from a seed catalog. You can only get them through a seed exchange, or you can only find them in these sort of seed library collections. And for every for every 5 of those green varieties that you can buy, there are this many that have died out in the last 100 years. So it's a kind of an important thing at this point, where we're going to use our plant diversity to adapt to future challenges in growing food. And we need as many options as we can get. We've lost so many already, and so many are just on the brink of not being perpetuated year by year. So it's really important for seed savers to do this. Find varieties that are rare and grow them and share the seeds. That's all it takes. Another example is, did you know that there are over 150 different kinds of tomatoes that have been bred in Canada? You would have a hard time finding them. They're not available in seed catalogs. And the reason is that by far most of the seeds that are available in Canada are grown by great big wholesale seed producers in other countries. And Canada is a very small market. The garden conditions for tomatoes in Canada is not a really big deal on the international wholesale seed scene. They're mostly interested in producing varieties that are adapted for warmer climates, like in the United States. So Canadian varieties just aren't part of that big system. And when you go to look at the big seed houses, you probably won't find Canadian varieties of tomatoes, and yet they exist. They were produced in Canada for Canadian growing conditions, and you can get them. Just they're hard to find, and you need to look for them. And we are trying to preserve them because they grow well in Canada. These are some of the examples. These happens to be a list of varieties that were developed in Alberta. And if you notice the dates on them, they're all sort of in the 1960s and 1970s. And the reason is that after the Second World War, we kind of realized that we had become very dependent on food from other parts of the world. And during the war, it became very obvious that we needed to be more self-reliant. And that's why a lot of attention was put into breeding more varieties of things that could grow in Canada, not just tomatoes, but also everything from horticultural fruit to beans and tomatoes and all sorts of things. And that sort of fell away again. We sort of felt that we weren't really in a place where we needed to be self-reliant anymore. And then a pandemic came along recently, and everybody started thinking about, gosh, we need to be more self-reliant and not rely on long supply chains anymore. So I think this is maybe a reminder now that we need to be thinking about having good local Canadian varieties around. So how do we do this? Do you need to be one of these kinds of seed banks? And my question to you is, which of these pictures shows a seed collection that is not a high quality seed collection? Is it that one up in the Arctic Circle, the Svalbard Global Seed Vault? Is it Canada's Agriculture Canada seed bank that has 100,000 samples of seeds in a giant frozen vault? Is it Paul with his box of seeds? Well, it's a trick question. These are all high quality seed collections. They're just different sizes. Yes, the Svalbard Global Seed Vault keeps its seeds very dry, very cold, and they do frequent tests on seeds throughout the seed bank system to make sure that the germination rate of the seeds is good, and to make sure that the seeds are produced in a way where they don't cross-pollinate with each other, and so on. Well, Paul does the same thing. He's looking after his seeds very well, diligently, and he's able to do that diligently because his collection is a manageable size, so he has the time to look after it well. And that's the trick. I think the whole thing is a small collection can actually be a higher quality collection because you have time to look after it. So here is my recipe for what makes a collection of seeds good in the long term. We want our seeds to be healthy so that when you plant them, they germinate. And that generally means that they have to start off healthy, and you have to keep them well stored so that they still have a high germination rate when it comes time to plant them. We want our seeds to be true to type, which means for those of you who know all about seed saving, you know that you have to keep different varieties apart and isolate them so that they don't cross-pollinate. But also, we'll talk later on through this about what we call roguing, which means removing the kinds that are, or removing the plants that are a little bit off, and maintaining an adequate population size for the plants. That's an important thing that we don't talk about quite as much as we probably should. And also, like I mentioned with Paul and his small seed collection, the scale, the size of your seed collection really has a lot to do with the quality. I've had seed collections myself that have just gotten too big, and I wasn't able to look after them very well. And once I downsized, I was able to look after them better, and I was much more satisfied with that. So we should not be too concerned about having the biggest seed collection, because in my experience, very often the biggest seed collection is the one that's most poorly maintained. You want it to be the right size so that you can look after it and have a good collection. And that means figuring out how many seeds should you have, how many varieties should you have, and also the main thing about that is figuring out how often you're able to regrow the seeds in your collection, because as they age, they will lose their germination, and you need to have a sustainable scale so that you can keep regrowing your seeds often enough that they will still be good have a good germination. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about how to organize a collection. I've seen a bunch of examples some good and some bad. I'm going to talk about the good ones, and we'll talk about when you're distributing seeds, how do you make sure that people who receive the seeds are able to know about where the seeds came from, and how all these good things that you've done to make the seeds high quality, that they would know that and be able to perpetuate that just as well as you did. So first of all, we want our seeds to be healthy. We want them to germinate when we plant them. That's the first thing. If you plant some seeds and they don't grow, then that's your first clue that they're not good seeds. So our first thing, seeds will germinate well when they're harvested, when they're ripe. And I'm sure you've seen this before, but I'll dive into it a little bit to say that about 95% of our plants have ripe, mature seeds when they're at a brown, dry stage. So a seed head that has brown and dry seeds, a pod like a bean pod or a pea pod that's brown and dry, when it's like that on the plant, that's the time when the seeds are ready. And what's happened is every little seed contains a little baby plant. And when it dries and gets to that brown and dry stage on the plant, it means that the mother plant has given as much food as possible inside that seed for the little baby plant to survive. And it will have to eat that food while it's sitting on the shelf. And so the more food that gets stored up in every seed, the longer the seed will last. So if you harvest the seeds a little bit early, it means they have less food and they won't last as long. It's that simple. Once a bean pod gets brown and dry, it's pretty obvious that no more juice can move through there to get nutrients to the seed. So that's as mature as that seed can get, and that's the time to harvest it. That's when you'll have the healthiest, longest lasting seed. Now, the other, say 5% of our plants have soft fruit. So tomatoes and squash and peppers, those are the kinds of at least food plants that we eat that have soft fruit, where you don't wait for them to turn brown and dry. You wait until the fruit ripens. So when the tomato is fully ripe, that's when the seeds are ripe. When the squash is fully ripe, and you can even let it sit for a little while and continue to ripen inside, then the seeds in the squash will actually still absorb some more nutrients and some more food, and the seeds will, as the seeds gain more food, then the seeds will be able to live longer in storage. One of the exceptions to this, I guess, is to remember that green peppers are not actually ripe. Peppers are ripe when they're red or orange or yellow or whatever color they're going to turn, but all green peppers are actually underripe. They're going to turn a different color. So you wait until they're fully ripe. It's kind of like tomatoes, right? Tomatoes start off green and then they usually turn into some other color. Peppers do the same thing. So if you take seeds out of a green pepper, you'll find they often won't grow. The other exception is with cucumbers. We usually eat our cucumbers when they're quite underripe and the seeds haven't formed yet. If you wait for a cucumber to fully ripen, it gets yellow and spongy and it's not very good to eat anymore. But if you want to save a few of those cucumbers on the plant, let them grow until they're no longer edible and they get soft and the seeds get big and hard. That's when the seeds are ready. When we're trying to clean up our seeds and get all the chaff out of them, right? 95% of the time we're dealing with the kind that have brown and dry seed heads or pods. And my favorite way of dealing with this is to use a whole collection of screens. I go to the hardware store and I get every size of screen I can find, and I go to the kitchen store and I get every kind of strainer that I can find. And I have I may be a little bit too proud of my collection of screens, but it's really useful to have different sizes of mesh. I have a really good example of that coming up. Some air movement will take the chaff away. Seeds are usually heavier than the stuff that you're trying to get rid of. So if you can blow on your seeds and blow the chaff away, that's a really good way to do it. Ultimately, it doesn't matter if you don't get the seeds perfectly clean. If you still have a little bit of stems and leaves and little bits of flowers or whatever it is mixed in with your seeds, it doesn't affect the seeds at all. The only two reasons that I would clean them up fully is, one, they look better. And if you want to share your seeds in a seed exchange and you want people to think you know what you're doing, it's kind of nice to clean them up. But if your friends don't mind and you don't mind, then a little bit of stems between friends is fine too. The other reason is just that they take up a little bit less space. If you can clean out all the chaffy stuff. If you've ever saved lettuce seeds, taken handfuls of lettuce fluff off of mature lettuce plants, and there are seeds in there, but there's also all kinds of other stuff, fluffy stuff in there. Sometimes I don't clean that. Sometimes I just sort of plant everything, and the seeds do the right thing, and the fluff and the bits of leaves and everything, they turn into compost when I plant, and it's fine. It's a little hard to measure out how many seeds you have. It's especially in our seed collection, we want to count how many seeds we have, and that's really difficult when you have all the little stuff in there with it. But it won't hurt the seeds at all. Now, seeds in the fleshy fruit, you do have to clean that out because the seeds need to dry. The seeds will store only when they're dry. So obviously we need to dry our seeds out. We need to get them out of the fruit. If you imagine something like a watermelon or a muskmelon or a squash, it's pretty easy. Just rinse the seeds, let them dry, keep them dry until you plant them, and that's it. The exception usually here is with tomatoes, where every tomato seed has a sort of ball of pulp all around it. It's a slippery jelly around every seed, and that is there actually to prevent the seed from germinating. So if you just dry the pulp with the seeds, it surrounds the seed kind of like with something like fruit leather. It never really dries out, but it's sort of like a fruit leather kind of texture. And sure enough, when you plant that, the seeds hardly grow. Maybe only 1 out of 20 will actually grow. But if you clean that jelly off, then 20 out of 20 seeds will grow. So it's doing its job as a germination inhibitor. It's meant to prevent the seeds from germinating inside the tomato. So if you think about it, seeds will germinate when they're moist and when they're warm. And that's exactly what it's like inside a tomato in the summertime. So why don't the seeds just sprout inside the tomato? Well, that's the reason. They would, if not for the jelly. So remove the jelly. I've just rubbed it with my fingers to do this. You'll see lots of other ways of doing this involving fermenting the seeds or putting them in a container for a few days, but I'm not going to go into that because we have lots of other things to cover. What I will do is give you an example. This is my best example of seed cleaning following a tragic accident that happened in my shed. This is an anise hyssop plant. And if you're not familiar with anise hyssop, it's a lovely herb. It has it's related to mint, but it has a mild licorice kind of flavor. So an anise or mild licorice flavor in the leaves and the flowers. I would cut this just as it is with the leaves and the flowers and dry it and either make tea out of it or add it with other tea to make this nice mild licorice kind of flavor in whatever drink you want. You can bake with it. You can do all sorts of things. It's a lovely herb. Think of it as a licorice flavored mint. Anything you do with mint, you could do with this. Well, it's one of those 95% of plants that have seeds when the flowers turn brown and dry. So you wait for the flowers to fully brown up, and inside, somewhere in there are lots of little seeds. You harvest the heads and kind of crunch them up, and the seeds fall out. And you get lots and lots of anise hyssop seeds, which I spilled on the floor in my shed, which seemed like a terrible tragedy at the moment. And I was really mad at myself that I dropped all my anise hyssop seeds on the floor. But never let a mistake go to waste. Go get your camera and document cleaning them up. So here I swept up the mess off the floor, and I should sweep the floor more often. There was all kinds of other stuff on the floor there mixed in with my seeds. And here's what I did. First, I ran it through one of those strainers that I pick up at the kitchen store. And this is one of my favorites because it has it's a great big strainer, and it has a size of mesh that's usually just right for getting the stuff like leaves and bits of stem and who knows what was on my floor, but the seeds will go through. So I kind of got rid of the big stuff by putting it through this. Then I lined up 3 different strainers. The one in the top has a bigger mesh than the one in the middle, and that has a bigger mesh than the one at the bottom. So the theory is that the big stuff is going to get caught in the top mesh, and then the middle-sized stuff will get caught in the middle, and the little tiny stuff will get caught in the bottom, and the dust will fall all the way down through into the bin. So let's see. Here it is. Sure enough, there's the dust in the middle that went through everything, and the big stuff is in one of those, and I look through that carefully and see that, no, it doesn't really look like seeds. And the middle-sized one has some stuff that might be seeds, but mostly fluff and, I don't know, stems and leaves and all that. But the strainer over on the right, that's all seeds. Okay, so that's the one that just happens to be the right size to catch the seeds. So that's my prize. That's most of the seeds that I spilled. And here's what it looks like. It's pretty good. That's pretty good. I'd be okay with sharing this with my friends. It's almost all anise hyssop seeds, but there are just a few little bits of leaves and whatnot in there. But it won't hurt anybody, and I think it's pretty uniform. So I was really pleased. But I thought, since I have the camera out, maybe I can do even better than this. So I use this kind of tray. I use this ceramic tray an awful lot because it's fairly shallow, and the edges they have a gentle slope on them. So when I blow into it, the air doesn't go back into my face. The air flow kind of goes up and over the lip, if you know what I mean. So on the left-hand side, these are my seeds with the little bits of whatever in there, and I blow very gently. And the little bits of whatever are lighter than the seeds, so they kind of move up. And that's you can see them, they've sort of moved up in the picture, and I could use my thumbs to lift that up and push it over the edge of the bowl. Sure, I'll have to sweep the floor later on, so might as well just make a mess on the floor. And then I stir around the seeds with my fingers and blow again and do this over and over again. And after about a minute, I get this. And there you go. The whole thing took about 5-6 minutes, including going to get my camera. And I've rescued these seeds that I spilled on my messy floor and cleaned them all up. Now, if I could do that, then surely you would think that I could go from the freshly harvested seeds and remove the bits of anise hyssop that were there. Or I could do the same thing with lettuce seeds, or I could do the same thing with any other kind of herb seeds. And indeed, those are the kind of steps that you use to get some nice cleaned up seeds from whatever you start with.
Great, thanks, Bob. We have a couple questions in the chat.
Great, this is a good time for a few questions, sure.
Perfect. So the first one is, I assume berries would fall under the soft category and don't need the flesh of the berry. Or is there any advantage to dry the berry thoroughly for preservation?
No, I think any kind of berry, wait until it's as ripe as possible. With something like raspberries or something, I'm guessing they tend to fall off the plant when they're really, really ripe. So you have to pick them before they fall off. But as ripe as possible is the first thing. And then I would simply crush the berries up and try to rinse the seeds out, maybe on a strainer to rinse them, to rinse the pulp through a strainer or something like that. But it would make sense to me to separate the seeds from the pulp of the berry instead of letting the berry dry.
Great. And then one more question. Why do squash and melon seeds manage to not germinate inside their fruit if they don't have the same jelly coat as the tomato seeds?
Yeah, I wish I knew that answer. That's a good one. Because they do germinate fairly easily when as soon as they're moist and warm, right? A lot of plants, and I don't know this specifically for squash, so it's just sort of an educated guess, but a lot of plants need a little bit of time before they'll be ready to germinate. It's definitely true with lettuce. If you take lettuce seed straight off of the plant and plant it right away, thinking, hey, I could get a fall crop of lettuce right now, they often won't germinate at all because they just need a little bit of time. It's a dormancy that delays their germination, but it's based on time and not on any kind of temperature or jelly or anything like that. So it may be the same with melon and squash. For sure, they don't germinate inside the squash. And if they did, that would be an extra Halloween surprise, I guess. You cut open your pumpkin and you find a whole bunch of sprouts inside. But every plant does have its way of making sure that that doesn't happen.
Yeah, someone said in the chat that their Styrian pumpkin was kept 9 months and had sprouting seeds when opened. And I've definitely had that too, where I've saved a squash too long and it hasn't sprouted, but the seeds have like opened up. So I guess
I see.
If you store it too long. So maybe try to get them harvested in the fall, I think. If you're saving for seed is good for some squashes.
Right. Yeah, and maybe another tip on that is as those seeds are starting to sprout, and maybe it took them several months before they did that inside the squash, they could be transplanted at that point. You could put them in little soil cells and grow them on at that point. The difficulty, I guess, would be if you wanted to, mail seeds to somebody or send them somewhere or have them packaged up in a seed library. It's hard to do once they've sprouted. It doesn't really work. But if you wanted to grow them, you sure could. So for storing your seeds, we do a lot of short-term seed storage with Seeds of Diversity. A lot of our seeds are used right away, but some of them might take a year or two before they're actually picked up for say a Seedy Saturday or for a seed exchange. And with so many different varieties, it really isn't possible to grow them all every year. So the seeds that were grown out 3 years ago, I would still like to have some that are really good quality, that have really good germination still 3 years later. On the other hand, sometimes we have really rare and unusual varieties that we want to keep as a backup for many, many years. And sometimes we have seeds that we've kept for 20 years now, just to make sure that if we don't have a source for them, or if one of the sources that we have disappears, that we have simply a backup. And it's kind of like computer files in a backup. Some of us remember when we used to have to back up our computer files and you never wanted to ever actually use the backup. And if you never did, that was a good thing, but it's nice to have. And so how do you do backup? And how do you make sure that the seeds that you're going to use maybe a few years from now are still going to be good a few years from now? So first thing is, all of your seeds should be kept in open air at room temperature for the first few months after you harvest them. Okay, these beans in the picture here were just harvested a few weeks prior to this. And they feel dry, and they look dry, and you can kind of squeeze them and they seem dry, but they're not actually fully dry yet. For the first couple of months after you harvest, there's still moisture in the seeds, and if you put them in a glass jar, the next time you look at that jar, you'll see it's all moldy. You have to let the seeds dry fully, all say, well, for a couple of months, at least until something like December. By the time December comes around, the seeds will have fully dried, as long as they're kept in a good, reasonably dry location, and then you'd be able to put them in a glass jar. So we keep them in paper until then. Tricky thing is you have to watch out for mice, and mice can chew through plastic containers. So if you're finding a place where you don't have mice eating your seeds, where they can still breathe to the air, and I've even invented screen covers. I use those, the same screens that I use for cleaning the seeds. I use those to cover open containers so that mice and birds can't get in and eat the seeds while they're drying. But once they're fully dry, after a few months have gone by, you can put them in an airtight container. If you keep your seeds cold, they will last for perhaps twice as long. So if I kept my seeds at room temperature, say some of my seeds at room temperature, other seeds in a fridge, then the seeds in the fridge would last twice as long. And if I froze the seeds in a freezer, then they could last for many, many years. Now, it's not a great place to put your seeds in a fridge, because the seeds also have to be kept dry while they're being stored, and fridges are usually really, really moist. If you don't believe me, go to your fridge and feel all around inside and realize how humid it is inside a fridge. It's a terrible place for seeds. But inside a glass jar, the air inside the glass jar can be dry, and the jar can be in a fridge, and then the seeds will stay dry and cold. So then they will last for a lot longer. Now you'll see different kinds of advice for each kind of seed. If you look up how long does a tomato seed last in storage, how long does a pepper seed last in storage, you'll find a range of years, and they usually mean when it's stored dry and cold. And I won't give you all of that information because it is different for every kind of seed. Okay, it's usually for peppers and tomatoes, you could keep them at room temperature for about 5 years and they'd still be good. If you kept them in a fridge, then 10 years. And if you kept them frozen, then many, many years, decades. We don't even know how long they can last sometimes. But with other seeds like onions, for example, onion seeds will typically last only for a year or two. And they will either need to be regrown more often, or they need to be stored really, really well to make them last longer. We'll talk a little bit later about how to find out whether your seeds are still good by doing a germination test. But for now, just to point out that the important thing is to keep your seeds dry and cold. And this is actually a graph showing what happens to the germination rate of a typical seed when it's kept in a warm and humid place or a dry and cold place. You can see how different the two lines are. What we're looking at here is the time across the bottom in years and the percentage of germination around the top. So I have two samples of seeds that have the same germination, just about 100%, but one of them is kept in a warm and humid place and one's kept in a dry and cold place. And this is an actual graph that somebody made. It took them 17 years to make the graph, but they did. And when I keep my seeds in a warm and humid place, they dropped to 50% germination after only a year. But in a dry and cold place, it takes 9 years for them to reach 50% germination. So it makes a really big difference. And finding a dry and cold place is often difficult. I have cold places in my house that are humid, like in my basement. And it's much more important for them to be dry than it is for them to be cold. So keep it dry and warm if you have to, and keep it dry and cold if you can, but keep it dry no matter what. And the way we do that is by putting the seeds in airtight containers like glass jars once they're fully dry. And to give you an idea of how this goes over time, if my seeds start off at 100% germination and start to lose germination as they age, once they get down to about half, then they drop off very quickly. So if I'm testing my seeds for germination and I find that they're at about only half or even 60% germination, then I know that it's time to regrow them, because they'll drop down to 40 and 20 before I know it, in just the next couple of years. So we're not aiming to regrow them when we get down to 20%. We're aiming to regrow them when they get down to 60%, because we know they'll lose germination very quickly after that. I like these glass jars. This is what we use for Seeds of Diversity's collection. There are lots of different sizes of these jars, and the lids are interchangeable, and it means that we can change one sample of seeds into another jar as we use up the seeds, and it kind of conserves space on the shelf. We have a pretty good, cool environment for them, but we also use a freezer to keep our backup collection. So I'll just talk about the two kinds of storage we do. One is in it's a closet adjacent to our office, pretty large kind of closet. It's in an air-conditioned building, so it's reasonably cool and it's dry year-round. This is where we keep seeds, just in in these jam jars and pickle jars. They're nice and airtight, they're easy to label, and the seeds will last for somewhere between 3 and 6 years, depending on the kind of seed. And if that's long enough for our purposes, for being able to send them to people to be either regrown or to distribute them so people can simply grow them, because we want these seeds to be sourced by people and accessible. If 3, 6, 8 years is long enough for that, then we just keep them in the jars in a cool room, and that's it. But if we want them to be stored for the long term as a backup, then we do this. These are plastic bins, and we put jars of seeds. Some of the jars have just a bunch of beans in them. Some of them have paper packets in them, so we can get a lot of different kinds in one jar if we have small amounts. And they're in the bin with the lids open. And if you can kind of see at the bottom of the bin, there's something white. It's silica gel. So we have nice dry silica gel at the bottom of the bin, and we put a garbage bag over the top. And during 3 days, that's enough for the silica gel to dry out the air and dry out the seeds. And that means it reduces the moisture in the seeds to the point where they can be frozen without any damage. And then if you're good, you can reach under the garbage bag and close the lids up quickly. Paul, who was in that other picture, he was good enough that he could actually close the lids without taking the garbage bag off. But I could never get the hang of that. It doesn't matter. A little bit of air that gets in is fine. It's mainly that the seeds have dried out to the point where the moisture level is low enough that when you freeze them, the moisture will not damage the seeds. And then these jars of seeds can be put in a freezer, and they will last for decades. Now, we mostly work with our regular collection in the closet because it's uncomfortable taking the seeds out of the freezer. They're cold on your hands. You have to re-dry them when you use them. So we only use it as a backup. But so far we've used the backup probably 3 or 4 times in 15 years. So it's nice to have it because we have needed it, but we haven't used it very much. And so that actually feels good, that it's worth having it when we need it, but the main sort of accessible portion of our seed library is working. We're keeping up with regrowing the seeds often enough. We're able to get good samples of seeds to replace the seeds as we use them, and so we don't need that backup as often as I feared we might. But this is how we do it, the 2 kind of methods that we use for storage. So I wonder if there are any questions on that at this point.
Yes, there are. So one of the questions I think was fairly answered, but the next one, how well do seeds do in storage with temperature changes? Example from -20 to 20 degrees.
Yeah, so the research on temperature changes and humidity changes in seed banks is that they do lose a little bit of germination. So the way we think about this is if we have a sample of seeds and it has only 70% germination and it's in a freezer, then we could take that sample out, it would warm up, it would be exposed to humid air, and then we'd try to dry it out and put it back in the freezer where it would thaw again. Or where it would freeze again, sorry. Or maybe this comes up when people say, hey, what happens when there's a power outage and your freezer doesn't work and it all warms up and then the power turns back on and then it all freezes again? Does that damage the seed? The research is that the seeds do lose a few percent of their germination. So you started out with 70%, this happened, and now they're at probably something like 68% germination. If you were taking the seeds out and putting them back in and losing 2% germination every time you did it, then you'd only want to do that, 10 times. So you bear that in mind. You make that part of your plan. We don't take the seeds from our frozen storage very often because we know that every time we do, we lose a little bit of germination. But if we do it occasionally, then that's okay. Sure, we lose a few percent, but that that is more than made up for by the fact that the seeds are lasting for many, many years. We've had some seeds that we have lost in our regular collection, and hey, we went to the backup collection, and there they were, and they still grew. And that was the whole point of having them in frozen storage in the first place. That's why we did that, and it's worth it. But yeah, bear it in mind that if you're keeping your whole collection in frozen storage and you're just saying, okay, I'm going to go get them out of the freezer every time I want them, that it does damage them a little bit to be frozen and thawed. And it's also really uncomfortable on your hands. So use it as a backup. That's my conclusion. Were there other questions about that?
Yeah, we've got two more questions, a bit about silica. So one is, how often / how much do you dry your silica packets to keep reusing them?
Yeah, so the silica is a water absorbing material. It's kind of like glass beads that absorb water. And the way it works is that it can be dried out in what I use is just my oven. I take it home and put it in the oven at home on trays, just at low heat, like the lowest heat the oven can give you. And in about 20 minutes or half an hour, it usually dries out. And the way you can tell is most of the silica that you can buy has little indicator crystals. They're either pink or blue, but they change color when they're dry. And that's how you can tell whether it's dry or whether it isn't. And if you have some that doesn't have the indicator crystal in there, well, I just mix it with stuff that does, so that then it all has the indicator, and then I can tell. It might last for several applications, but once the little indicator crystals show that that it's absorbed enough water, then it's time to recharge it. And it can be one every 10 times, or it can be every few times, and it depends a lot on what time of year we do it, depending on how humid the air is. So anyway, there's no simple answer to that, but I follow what the silica gel itself shows.
That makes sense. And then another question is, when drying seeds in the silica, if they are loose in the jar, so the seeds are loose in the jar, is there a max like level to fill the jar? So just clarification, do seeds at the bottom of the jar dry as much as those at the top of the jar?
Yeah, that's a neat question. Yeah, so I understand the question is that if you had a whole jar full of beans and you put it with the lid open in a box with silica gel in it, and the air is drying out from the silica, the top part of the beans would dry out first, and the bottom of the jar would dry out later. So how does that work? The way I think of it is that that's probably what would happen, and I don't go in there and try to mix the beans around. We just simply don't have time to do that. We leave it for 3 days to let things dry, and then close up the lids. And to me, if there is still any moisture in the bottom layer of the beans, it's going to kind of dissipate into the rest of it, and that will still limit the amount of moisture that's in the whole sample of beans to be dry enough. It won't be uniform at first, but it'll become uniform inside the jar, and I expect that it would still be dry enough that you'd be able to freeze it. So I guess the short answer is, don't worry about that. I think it'll be okay.
Great, thanks. That's all the questions.
Okay. Well, in our recipe of how to keep a seed collection alive, there are a few more things which have to do with kind of how you'd manage it. And I wanted to point out that we focus mostly on self-pollinated kinds of food plants anyway, and most people do. You probably are familiar with the fact that there are self-pollinating plants like tomatoes and beans, and cross-pollinating plants like squash and cucumbers and peppers. And there are a lot more self-pollinating kinds out there. The number of different kinds of tomatoes out there, and the number of different kinds of beans is so much more than the number of different kinds of broccoli or cucumbers. Okay. And the reason for that is simply just put yourself in your own shoes, that you can grow a lot of different kinds of tomatoes because they're self-pollinating. And you can grow a lot of different kinds of beans because they're self-pollinating, but you can only probably get only one cucumber um, or one kind of butternut squash at a time because they're cross-pollinating. And that has been the same situation for all seed savers, that we're all in the same position where we all grow lots of tomatoes and lots of beans. And that's why there are so many of them. Yet we've saved so many more, and we've lost so many different kinds of broccoli and other things. And think of, biennials. There are just not very many kinds of broccoli, not very many different kinds of beets, because they're harder for people to save. It's simple, very simple reason. But focusing on what we do have left and wanting to keep that around, I do want to talk a bit about isolation and give some perspective on isolation and how uniformity, how to think about the uniformity that comes from isolating plants at different spacings. We have decided to talk a lot about the difference between isolation for seeds that are used at a community level and seeds that are used at a commercial level. Okay, in commercial seed production, there are standards which are quite stringent and very difficult for some of us to achieve in home gardens. Okay, so for something like squash, we'll often say to keep two different kinds of squash, you have to separate them by 1,500 meters so they can't cross-pollinate. And we say that for commercial seed production. And for sure, we don't want to give anyone the false idea that if they don't do that, that their squash is going to be fine. We do want really high standards of isolation in commercial seeds. And the reason is we want Canada's seed companies to be trusted by gardeners. Okay, it was the situation about 10 years ago that you could buy seeds from all kinds of small seed companies, but when people did that, they found poor quality. And that has changed. I think a lot of our small scale seed companies today are producing really high quality seeds and doing a really, really good job. And it's, I think, in response to the fact that at one time we didn't have that quite level of satisfaction that people have now. We want to keep that going and have more people buy local seeds and more people have faith that local seeds are good quality. And so I don't at all want to relax the idea that commercial seeds should have lower standards. But what if you're growing seeds for your community seed swap? And what if you have some, say, tomato seeds, and 1 out of 50 of those seeds winds up getting crossed and they're not quite the same? You have to decide whether that's going to be, is that going to break the quality of your local seed swap, or is that acceptable for you? What if you're saving seeds just for yourself and you plant a row of beans and they're almost all the same, but not quite all the same? Well, that's not good enough for a farmer, but is that good enough for you? And so understanding the difference is that if you follow what we are recommending as community isolation standards, and you can find this, Seeds of Diversity has information per species about isolation and population sizes and so on, but we have it in 2 columns. Okay, so one is for the commercial isolation standard, and we say this is what seed companies should do. But the commercial, or sorry, the community standards that we have, and you can see them here: 5 meters instead of 15, 3 meters instead of 6 for tomatoes and beans. The community standards are more achievable, but they'll still give you good results. They'll give you results that people have determined are good enough to satisfy most people most of the time, but not necessarily farmers. And that's kind of the distinction. A farmer will require much higher standards than a home gardener a lot of the time. So understanding how commercial seed production works too is that when you buy seeds that are produced at commercial standards, you're getting them usually to be about 99.8% uniform. And that's really uniform. That means you'll hardly ever see in your row of lettuce, you'll hardly ever see one that isn't the same. And that's what farmers want. Think about this, that if you were producing your own seeds and saving them and growing them again the next year, and saving them and growing them the next year, and over and over and over and over again, but at 99.8% uniformity, that little 0.2% would add up, right? You'd have some unusual types growing in your lettuce row every now and then. And if you saved seeds from those, then that would increase the number of unusual types that you'd see over and over and over. And pretty soon you would have a whole big mixture. So commercial seed companies are actually keeping their own stock of seeds at much higher rates of isolation. They're actually isolating their stock seed even more than the seed that they're actually selling to you. They often have two different farms, one producing their stock seed extremely well isolated, but they're using that then to produce the seeds that they sell. And this is something that's beyond what Seeds of Diversity could accomplish, and it's something that's probably beyond what most home seed savers would be able to do. So understanding this, I think, is the first step in being able to interpret what it means when you want to isolate your tomatoes, because that's the right thing to do, but then you read somewhere it says, well, you have to keep them 15 meters apart. Or you read somewhere where it says you have to keep them even further apart. What does that mean? Well, it means the person who says, keep your tomatoes 30 meters apart from each other, they're trying to produce stock seeds, which is an extremely uniform kind of standard. And someone who says 15 meters is trying to produce commercial market seeds, which is also a quite high standard. If you kept your tomatoes only 5 meters apart, which is about 15 feet, you would get very good results. And I would be quite satisfied with the seeds that come from that. Every now and then you might see an off type, but with tomatoes, it's easy to just not save seeds from the off types that show up every now and then and keep a variety pure nonetheless. So I say this just because there is some confusion around the range of isolation distances that we see, and this is how to start thinking about what those things mean. And your purpose is what matters. Who is your audience? Are you trying to sell seeds to farmers, or are you trying to preserve a rare variety to keep them available in your community? When we are preserving something, and this is an example with some cabbages. This is a cabbage that is supposed to have a nice round head, perfectly round, and I found one that had a flat head. Now, I don't know how one of my cabbage seeds, which I had saved, wound up having a different kind of cabbage in there. That's not supposed to happen, but it happened in this one point. So the right thing to do is to remove that from the row, and I just ate this cabbage for supper. I'm saving seeds from all of the cabbages that have the right shape and the right size, and that's easy to do with cabbage because you can see all of those things long before they actually produce flowers and long before they make the seeds. I can remove all the off types of cabbage long before they make seeds, and that way I can ensure that the seeds will bear true to type and they won't have any of the unusual off types within them. It's easy to do with lettuce, and it's easy to do with a lot of greens. It's harder to do with tomatoes because you don't often see the tomato itself until long after the pollination has happened. But it's fairly easy to deal with tomatoes because they're self-pollinating. It's more difficult with things like squash, where you don't see the off types until they've pollinated and they cross-pollinate. So it's a lot harder to clean up a squash and get them more uniform. Here's an example with lettuce. If you look on the left-hand panel, this is a lettuce called All Year Round. And incidentally, my lettuces are spaced about 1.5 feet apart so that they have lots of room to grow up because they'll grow tall and make seeds. So it's a bigger spacing than you'd have for just lettuces to eat. But notice that the lettuce on the very top is bolting earlier than the others. If I were to save seeds from the early bolting lettuce plant, then I would get more early bolting lettuce seeds next year. And I don't want early bolting lettuce seeds. I want them to last in the heat of the summer as long as possible. So when I see this one that's growing differently than the others, I'll pull it out and put it on the compost. And that means I'll have fewer plants to save the seeds from, but I'll have higher quality seeds by doing that. In the panel on the right, if you notice, there's one toward the top that has a bit of a different shape and some red color in it. And here's a oops, wrong way. There's a close-up. I don't know how it got mixed up with some other kind of lettuce or crossed with a lettuce that has some red in it, but it's not supposed to be red. This is a green oak leaf lettuce. It doesn't look like a green oak leaf lettuce because they're all starting to bolt and they're far enough along in their growth that I wouldn't eat them anymore. But this particular lettuce actually had not bolted yet. It was actually still quite good to eat. And I know that because I cut it and ate it instead of letting it go to seed. So we're looking at our plants even from the very beginning when they're seedlings, all the way through until they bear seeds, to look for any plants that aren't quite right. Remove them. Don't save the seeds from them. And that's a way of making sure that you're saving seeds that are true to type. And particularly if this were a very rare kind of heirloom lettuce that I couldn't get someplace else, I wouldn't want it to get messed up by having a different kind of lettuce kind of getting in there. I want to keep it because since I can't get the seeds from another source, if I am the only source for this lettuce, then I want to do it properly. And this is a very big part of making sure that it's done properly. I also want to say a little bit about the number of plants. We aim to get seeds from as many different plants as possible. That is, as many plants that are all of that kind of uniform size and shape and color and flavor and so on. The reason is that these lettuces all have the same shape, color, texture. They're all bolting at the same time. They all seem to be the same, right? So why not just take seeds from one plant, maybe two plants? The reason is that although these look the same, they only look the same because we've removed over time, over many generations, all of the traits that look different. We've only left the traits that look the same. That's why they all look the same. But there are all kinds of traits that we can't see. Maybe some of these plants are much better in drought. And you can see over on the left, there's actually an irrigation line. So I wouldn't know if any of these are better in a dry year because they're being watered. And what if maybe some of these plants just happen to be more mildew resistant than others? But this is a sunny year. We don't have a mildew problem, so I can't tell. I would not want to lose either of those things. I want to get the seeds from the drought-resistant plant and the mildew-resistant plant, but I don't know which one it is. So I have to take seeds from all of them in order to not lose those invisible beneficial traits. That's the reason why I would always say take as many seeds as you can from as many different plants as you can if they're all uniform. So we rogue them first to get rid of the off types, and then we take seeds from as many plants as we can and mix them together. And that is our best way of making sure that we preserve all of the invisible traits that will be useful to us. So when people talk about population size and taking seeds from many plants, that's what they're talking about. That's the reason. Now, you might not have this much space. What if you only have room for a few plants? Well, take seeds from as many plants as you can. That's the main rule of thumb. If you can't achieve the population size that they say, whether it's 20 or 40 plants, if it's a rare variety that doesn't have another source, and you're the seed saver who's saving that variety, then, well, do the best you can, because doing the best you can is better than nothing at all. and the population sizes can range quite a bit. We have inbreeding plants that we think of self-pollinating plants as being inbreeding, and only 10 or 20 plants would be enough to capture all of the genetics of a tomato variety or a bean variety, whereas the cross-pollinating plants often have a lot of diversity within them. So corn and onions are at the extreme of that, where there's actually a lot of variation within a bunch of onions that even they look the same, they're actually quite genetically different. And so it's advised at least to take seeds from a lot of different onions. Hard to do, but it's something that we need to consider when we're saving, especially varieties that you can't get someplace else, when you're the one who's preserving them. So if there are some questions about that, I want to make sure that we have time to talk a bit about germination tests. That comes up later.
Yeah. So there's a question from Carla. I think Carla will talk about the how to approach teaching maybe after, but right now we'll just ask if there's a guide that's specific to community isolation distances. Siri popped the Seed Savers Exchange into the chat, and if everyone wants to take a look at that, that's a really great link. But it has distancing at ranges, and I was wondering if you could speak to any community isolation distancing guidelines.
Yeah, so when there's a range, that's often how it's published. So there'll be a range of distances or a range of population sizes, and so what that means is that the bottom of the range will give you good enough results, and the top of the range is what you would aim for if you wanted the highest quality seeds. But understanding where you fit within that range, I think it's up to you and understanding who the seeds are meant for.
Awesome. And then Mary-Ev, I don't know if your question got answered, but I think it's worth asking again. In terms of genetic variety, could you start from one off-type plant that you find interesting and save these seeds to then multiply your population in the following seasons?
Absolutely.
Cool.
Yeah. A lot of really neat varieties have come out of, one weird off-type that somebody found and saved the seeds and perpetuated or multiplied those. And if they come true, and if they have some interesting feature, well, that's how a lot of new varieties come about. And that's not just not just an interesting thing to do. It can be really, really, really fun too.
Great. And then a question from Ruth. So in a small seed library with several people contributing, should we be mixing all of the same seeds before distribution, i.e. get all the black crim seeds from all the sources and mix? And what about sharing across seed libraries? Should we trade and then mix?
That is actually my favorite way to achieve greater population sizes. If you have some black crim seeds from one grower and you feel like they're good quality, and some black crim tomato seeds from another grower and you feel they're also good quality, then mixing those seeds together gives you a greater chance of having all of those invisible traits that we don't even know what they're there for. We don't even know if they're there, but they always turn out to be varieties always turn out to be better and more vigorous when they come from multiple plants. And so that's a totally valid way to achieve a greater population size. And we do that a lot, actually.
Cool. And then for smaller gardens or in urban spaces, is hand pollinating a good option to try and save seeds? How is it different than open pollination as far as seed quality and genetics go?
Yeah, so if you hand pollinate to be able to prevent cross-pollination between different varieties or with your neighbors, say, just be sure that you're pollinating as many plants as you can. The results of hand pollination should be just as good as open pollination with the same number of plants. But what we often do is we get lazy and we don't get pollen from all the plants, and we don't fertilize it to all the plants. So just make sure that you're involving as many plants as possible to get that whole population involved.
Awesome. And I think this question might lead into the next section a little bit. So how do you assess seed quality coming in from grow out volunteers, sorry?
Well, we work with grow volunteers of all levels of experience. Um, in a nutshell, I would say that I want to involve everybody who is potentially interested in helping to grow seeds. So if there's a person who has never done it before but they would like to, um, we will find a seed that we would like to get grown out, but it isn't crucial. So if it doesn't work out for any reason, it's no huge loss. But if it does work out, then it benefits us because then we don't have to grow that one out again. If we have a seed that there is no other supply for it, then that goes to a person who has a lot of experience, and rightfully so. But I think I mentioned that about half of our grower members are beginners. And so a big part of what Seeds of Diversity tries to do is what I like to say is grow more seed savers. We're not as much about growing seeds as we are about growing seed savers, because if we grow the seed savers, the seeds will grow themselves or something like that. And I've always found that people who want to do this kind of thing are interested in doing it right. I don't think anybody volunteers to take on a seed saving project and then intentionally does it poorly. I think people are here for the right reasons.
And just a quick question, I think, before the next section, is there a difference between using open pollinated varieties and hybrid varieties in the seed saving process?
Yeah, so if you save seeds from hybrid varieties, you'll find a kind of a mixture of offspring in the next generation. And it has to do with how the genetics kind of play out. So you won't get the same seeds, or you won't get the same variety. 2 and 3 generations later, it'll be something different. And that will be disappointing if you wanted the same thing, but it can be a source of really interesting opportunities if you just want to see what you get, because you can then save the seeds from the most interesting outcomes from that, and maybe have a new variety on your hands. And that's also how new varieties come about.
Okay, great. I think we're ready to move on to germination.
Yeah, so I'll go through this a bit quickly because we're running short on time a little bit. But we wanted to talk about how many seeds you should have in your seed library, and to maybe put it in a nutshell, what I find that Seeds of Diversity needs in collecting seeds is to have 20 populations. So when we're talking about how many seeds make a population of tomatoes, that's about 20. Of squash, it's about 20. So if I want 20 populations of a certain tomato seed, say black crim because it just came out, how many seeds do I need? Well, 20 populations, 20 seeds in a population, that's 400 seeds. So if I have 400 good black crim seeds, that's enough for me to supply 20 seeds to 20 different growers over time. And for the lifetime of that sample, which might be 5 years, that's probably fine. I probably won't need to send that out to more than that many people. So we'll keep 400 seeds. And then if we have more than that, we'll send them directly to other seed libraries, seed swaps, Seedy Saturdays, and anyone else who can distribute those seeds and get them out there for people to grow. Different seed libraries have different ways of operating, and so this is not a rule that you need to follow the same way. What I mean by this is think about how many populations you want to keep instead of how many seeds you want to keep, and think of a population as the number of seeds you would send to somebody to grow out a variety. So it's like a packet. How many packets do you need to keep? We do germination tests about every 3 to 5 years to find out how well our seeds are keeping. And there are some questions sometimes about how many seeds do you need to make a good germination test. If you look it up, you might find that a commercial germination test is 400 seeds. They put 400 seeds in a paper towel or something and see how many grow. That's a lot. It's a lot of work, uses up a lot of seeds, takes a long time to count. And honestly, I don't need to know the exact germination rate. I don't need to know whether my seeds are at 70% or 71% or 72%. I don't care. I want to know, are they pretty good or not good? Are they good enough to keep for another year, or at a point where they should be regrown? And it turns out that 10 or 20 seeds is enough to give us that much of a gist. Now with 10 or 20 seeds, and you can see some examples here of what that looks like, it'll tell you, are the seeds good enough for a while? Are they good enough to send to somebody? Are they good enough to disappoint somebody if I send them? Are they good enough to keep for another year or two? Or do I need to throw these out because they're no good at all? All right, 10 or 20 seeds will tell you that, but it will only be an approximate statistic. So that's the difference. The difference between a small test of 5 seeds is it's only accurate to within 20%. This 80%, one seed didn't grow, so I say it's 80%, but really it could be 100% if I did it again and 5 seeds would grow. Or if I did it again and 2 seeds didn't grow, it would come up to 60%. So it's quite ambiguous. And the commercial seed company wants something much more exact. And so this sort of illustrates how a larger test gives you a more statistically exact result. This is just to say how it works in commercial seed companies, and we don't have to do that in our situation, but they would typically do 8 separate tests of 50 seeds each, and it's a huge amount of work, which we don't need to do if we only need to have a kind of the gist of whether the seeds are good enough or not. But the process is exactly the same. Regardless of how many seeds you use, the germination test is simply planting them to find out how many of them grow. So you count out the exact number that you're going to use, so you have to know how many there were planted, and you can either put them on a paper towel. They can be sandwiched between paper towels. I think there are some some examples of that. Where I like to use the brown paper towel instead of the white one, because you can see the seedlings a lot better when they sprout, but that's just because I'm old and I need glasses to see the sprouts anyway. You wet it, you roll it up, and you leave it for 3 or 4 days to let the seeds start to sprout. You unroll it, and once it's unrolled, you should be able to remove some of the seeds that have sprouted, count that many, and put the ones that haven't sprouted back again for a few more days. The reason for that is it's easier to count the new sprouts and add it to the previous sprouts. But however you do it, whether you do this many or whether it's just 10, let it go for about a week in total and see how many grow. It's really important this just says count the number of sprouts twice, because some of them will grow earlier, some of them will grow later, and it's easier if you count them out in 2 different stages and remove the ones that have sprouted, so you can see the ones that are new in the second time around. The important thing is to germinate them at the correct temperature. So we would normally plant pepper seeds someplace warm, because they need warmth in order to grow. And we would normally plant lettuce seeds in cool soil because they prefer to germinate in cool soil. So if you're going to plant your lettuce seeds just when the snow has just gone away, then do your germination test in a cool place, because that will give you the same results as the conditions where you're tending to plant them. And if you're going to plant your pepper seeds, as you should, where they're nice and warm, then do your germination test in a warm place too. Whether that's on top of your fridge or whether you find a warm heater someplace, the test should match the actual use of the seeds to give you an accurate impression of what's going to happen. And then what the ultimate part of this is to understand how often you need to regrow the seeds that you have. If you have leftover seeds from the previous year, plant a few, see how many grow. Sometimes I just put them in a little pot of soil and see how many sprouts come up. The purpose of a germination test in a seed library, I think, is really to know whether your seeds are good for sending out to people, or whether it's time to get them regrown. And your own judgment on this is the right one. It's how you get the information about that. A neat trick is if you can remove some of the seeds that aren't going to grow anyway. There are always some little seeds in your sample that didn't form properly, and they'll never grow. And if you were to get rid of those, that increases your germination rate and makes it more accurate. So when I was blowing on the seeds earlier on to get rid of the chaff, I was also blowing away some of the later seeds that didn't form properly, and that's a good thing. You don't want those pretending to be good seeds. Get rid of them if you can. And if you ever get rid of pulp from tomatoes by using water, the later seeds will float. If you find some of your tomato seeds floating off, that's okay. Let them float, because they might not be good seeds in the first place. And finally, the size of your seed collection. We went back, or I'm going way back to the very beginning where I mentioned Paul and his box of seeds. That was the right number of seeds to be able to maintain his collection. Say you have enough space where you grow your seeds to grow out 6 varieties of tomatoes. And the way your seed library works is that you're keeping your seeds nice and dry, and you find that the seeds last for about 8 years. How many kinds of tomatoes can you have in your collection? Well, if you need to grow 6 kinds out every year, and you want to grow them out every 8 years, then you can only have 48 kinds of tomatoes. If you have more than that, you'll find out that you can't keep up unless you get more volunteers. And so thinking that through in advance is, I think, the real key to being able to have a high quality seed collection and to have good quality seeds that you're sending to the people that you send them to. And it's better to match the scale to what you can actually do at that level of quality, because then you'll have happy people. I always say it's a lot easier to make a seed collection than it is to keep it alive. It's really easy to amass 1,000 different kinds of seeds. You can get them from anywhere, and you can put them in a closet and say, hey, look at my huge seed collection. But if 5 years later, half of those seeds are dead, then it's really not as much fun then. So think about manageability, think about scale. And I think the final thing I have here is, if you have less than 100 different kinds of seeds, you can just put them in a box. Seeds of Diversity has a lot more than 100 different kinds of seeds. So we have a kind of like a library kind of system where we keep track of where all of our seeds are, in which box. The seeds are all numbered. We keep track of how old they are when they were harvested, where we got the seeds, how much we have, their location, and their germination rates. And these are all good things to pass along to people. If you're sending the seeds out, it's good to let them know not only the variety name. Most of the time, that's all you see on a package of seeds, but it's good to pass along where they came from too, and the germination rate, if you can do that. And don't be worried if the germination rate is 70%. It's better to let people in your community know that only, say, 3 out of 4 of these seeds will grow, because then they can plant a few extra, and they can still get the number of sprouts that they want. So information is often the last thing that gets collected and the last thing that gets passed along, but it's sometimes the most important part of it. So we encourage information collection and transparency about that too. So that's my recipe for a successful seed library, and I wonder if there are any other questions.
Yeah, just a question from Ruth again. Would using a heat mat be good for germ tests, or with the baggie, does it get too hot?
I would use a heat mat for any kind of tropical seeds like peppers, tomatoes, eggplant. I mean, I guess the thing is just to make sure that you're giving them the same conditions during the germination test as they're going to have when they're growing. And a lot of the time, you might use a heat mat for your pepper seed test and say, hey, look, 90% of these germinated. Isn't that great? But then you give the seeds to somebody and they plant them in a cool place and none of them grow. And they say, oh, these seeds are terrible. So there is some information that has to be passed along that they need warmth to germinate, for example. But you could make the other mistake, which is to try to germinate your pepper seeds in a cool place and they don't grow. And you become disappointed with your sample of seeds, which is actually perfectly good. It's just that the germination test didn't show them to be perfectly good. So either way, for sure, do the test in exactly the same situation that you would grow them for real.
Awesome. There's a question I missed earlier from Jolene. Can you over dry with silica packets or using silica?
You can, but it's really hard to do. So yes, seeds need a little bit of moisture to stay alive. They're living plants, a little baby plant inside that seed. And if you dry it out completely, then the poor thing, it dies, right? Like anything would if it were dried out. So if you put, say you filled a jar a quarter of the way up with seeds and the rest with silica gel and put the lid on and left it that way for a month, then the seeds would probably dry out and die. But you'd have to do that in order to dry them out that much. In any other kind of regular way of using silica gel, especially if there's less silica gel than seeds, you wouldn't be able to damage them by drying them out too much.
Okay, great. And just, I'm going to squeeze two questions together from Ada and Carla. Carla's asking about the method of teaching seed saving to volunteers who are eager, but maybe don't have a lot of knowledge and not wanting to appear as if you're speaking down to anyone. And then Ada just wrote, is there a misconception in the novice seed saver community that you wish was better understood? Perhaps an area where people overcomplicate things or get intimidated by seed saving. And so just approaching maybe novice seed savers.
Absolutely, yeah. It is kind of a thing that I've seen many novice seed savers kind of being reticent to try this because they think it's hard or complicated. And I think the reason that they think that is that they've read something somewhere that told them you have to do this and you have to do that, and they feel like it's much harder than it is. I would like to say that saving seeds is about as complicated as gardening, which is very complicated, but lots of people learn it. And it's as difficult to do as cooking, which, takes a lot of work to learn to do it really, really well. But lots of people can cook too and do a good job of it. I don't see that seed saving is any more inaccessible than those two things. And that's the message that I try to give as much as possible, that if you can grow a tomato, you can grow seeds. And if you can grow lettuce, you can grow lettuce seeds. An absolute beginner walking into it who has no idea how to grow a tomato plant might not be able to grow tomato seeds because you have to grow the plant first. So there is that. But I really, really try to avoid and prevent that kind of intimidating message, because it's, at least at the beginner stage and at least at the trying it out kind of stage, it's very forgiving. There are lots of ways that you can do it right.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Bob, so much. It's just 10 minutes past our time, so I think I'll wrap everything up. Thank you again for spending time with us.